Jack Ryan was as good a fiddler as ever fiddled on a string. He could manage.
Hi VC, British and Irish Folk Volume 3. I've made a balls up here with the light, so I hope this one turns out fine. Anyway, it has to be said that the 1970s and the 1960s were the halcyon days for British and Irish folk music, particularly for folk guitarists. Principally among them is, of course, the legend Bert Jansch, and also John Renbourn, equally a legend in my eyes and to my ears. But also we have to remember the wonderful American guitarists that were around that time as well. This is a beautiful album of traditional Irish music performed by a variety of British and American guitarists. This one came out on a Stephen Grossman label, and it features the American guitarists Doug Baker, Stephen Grossman himself, and Martin Simpson, David Graham, and John Renbourn, three British guitarists. Phenomenal album, well worth checking out. You don't see this one around. I'm actively seeking to get a few copies of it for a few individuals in the VC, principally for Zeke, the vinyl geek. I know you would dig this one enormously. There's one or two others out there as well I have in mind for this one, but it's not one that you come across too often, unfortunately. But a beautiful album, well worth checking out. Stephen Grossman I plan to do a series on as well. I've got a lot of his work. He's kind of very ragtime influenced, a lovely clean guitarist, and this is one of his best albums. It's called My Creole Belle. It's released on Transatlantic, came out in the early 70s I believe. But moving on swiftly, Bert Jansch and that whole axis between himself, John Renbourn, and the Pentangle was a glorious era for traditional folk music in the UK and in the British Isles. I'll come to these guys in a minute. That's the Pentangle. This is one of their most vaunted albums. It's called Basket of Light. But my favourite Pentangle album is this one, which came out in the late 1960s. It was their second album. It's a double album. It's a first album is live. The second one is a studio recording. It's a beautiful mixture of folk music, jazz, and even elements of ragtime. What gives these guys a very interesting dynamic is the vocals. Jackie McShee was a magnificent folk vocalist. Bert Jansch had a lovely baritone, and also John Renbourn used to help out. But the backbone of this band was, without doubt, the magnificent guitar interplay and the close harmony singing between all three members. But the dual guitar work of John Renbourn and Bert Jansch was astonishing, and also the lovely rhythmic section of Danny Thompson and Terry Cox. So a real supergroup here. Okay, and they recorded under prize, unlike the solo members of Pentangle, who all recorded mostly in their early careers on the Transatlantic label. Okay, so moving swiftly on, Bert Jansch, I've got a whole host of his albums to show, so I'll try and be as quick and as painless as possible with this one, for those of you who are not into your folk music. This is his debut, it came out in 1965, the titular album, Bert Jansch, recorded while he was in his late teens. It's a magnificent album and one of the greatest folk albums ever recorded. Strolling Down the Highway, it's just an incredible song to kick things off. But his most renowned track, Needle of Death, which was covered recently so effectively by Neil Young on A Letter Home, is on this, as indeed is Bert Jansch's cover of Angie, which was done by David Graham. A great acoustic instrumental, which was also covered by Paul Simon, I believe. But this is a beautiful album. This is a first pressing. I'm lucky to get it on Transatlantic. Extremely strong album. His second album I don't have is called It Don't Bother Me, but I do have his third, also on Transatlantic, called Jack Ryan, and this is also excellent. It features the Ewan McCall track, The First Time I Ever Saw Your Face, and the lovely 9-minute title track, Jack Ryan. But also on side 2 it contains one of his most renowned tracks, which is called Black Waterside, which is covered to great effect in the 1970s by both Jackie McShee and by Sandy Denny. Okay, And then after that, came in 1966 or 67, came 2 albums. The first one here is this one called Bert and John, and this is the first real pairing together by the two of them, even though John Renbourn did play on some tracks in this album. This is the first one where they actually collaborated for every particular track on it, and this is a lovely album recorded in one sitting in their squat that they share together in London. It's called Bert and John. I've seen this called Stepping Stones as well, an American version of this. Features a few Charlie Mingus tracks. Goodbye Pork Pie Hat principally is on it. There's a beautiful track called The Time Has Come, which is on one of the Pentangle albums. I think it's on Sweet Child, but that's an excellent album as well. Dave, you might remember this was one of the ones I got as part of the haul for €5, so that was a real steal. I was very, very happy to get that. Also, Nicola, this is actually very good as well. This came out the same year, and this features some, particularly side 1 is really, really nice. Go Your Way My Love is an amazing track. Title track Nicola is decent enough, but I love Rabbit Run and on side 2, and also Box of Love. And the most redoubtable song on this though is Love is Teasing, which is his version of Love and Pleasing, which is an old ballad from the British Isles my mum used to sing to me when I was a young lad. But that's a beautiful album, Nicola. And then we come to my second favourite of Bert Jansch's album, which came out in 1973 or 1974. It's called Rosemary Lane. This is a beautiful album with artwork designed by his wife, Heather, I think was her name. Beautiful album. Some lovely, it's entirely acoustic, but some beautiful instrumentals, some lovely classical guitar workouts, and some astonishing intimate songs. This is really one for Valentine's Day. This gets heavy spin on Valentine's Day, which is coming up shortly. I particularly love the opening track, Tell Me What Is True Love, which is just gorgeous. Rosemary Lane is a beautiful song as well, and the song that opens side 2 is Renardine the Fox, which was covered by Andy Irvine to great effect a couple of years ago. But an absolutely astonishing album, and this is definitely one of the folk meisterworks that came out in the 1970s. And a beautiful album called Rosemary Lane. Those who are not familiar with Bert Jansch's work and who are not too into the blues style of it should seek this one out. Those that are into the blues side of things should definitely go with this particular one. But both albums are definitely are must-haves, really. Okay, and then the following year he came up with this one, which is called Moonshine. This came out in 1974, I believe, produced by Tony Visconti. Danny Thompson plays on this one. This one is a cut-out version. It's an American pressing on Reprise. I think this is the first release that he had on Reprise. They were all transatlantic before this. It features his rendition of the Scottish ballad Dewey Dens of Yarrow, which I showed recently, and I played recently on my McCanley, when I showed the McCanley album on my last Vinyl Finds. His version on this, Bert Jansch's version on this, has to be said, isn't as good as the McCanley version, but it's decent nonetheless. Of principal interest here, though, is his rendition of The January Man, but mostly for the titular track, Moonshine, which is a gorgeous track. It's an original track penned by Bert Jansch himself. Beautiful workout, really, really gorgeous lyrics, and a beautiful song. Really, really decent song. The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face is also featured in this. It's a song that Bert Jansch recorded 3 times in his career. And so this is a decent album. It's not strong the whole way through, not like Rosemary Lane. I mean, every track on this one is a killer. This is kind of, it's got some low moments, you know, but it's definitely well worth checking out if you see it for a decent price. And then in 1974, the following year, he recorded this album, which is LA Turnaround. This is on the famous Charisma label. It features a member of the Monkees. I can't recall his name, but I know one of the Monkees played on it. It also features pedal steel guitar, so it's a very kind of country Americana sound to it. I know that Klaus Voormann, who had links with the Beatles, played on this, and it features a re-recording of Needle of Death, which was, as we may recall, one of the tracks on his debut from 10 years earlier. The Blacksmith is on this one as well, which is a famous folk track. A nice album, it has to be said. I don't play it too often, but it's definitely decent. And then after that, I think Santa Barbara Honeymoon, or I think that's the name of it, Santa Barbara Honeymoon. He left the music scene for a while. At that stage, Pentangle had folded, and he opened a music store, I believe, in London, and he took a sabbatical. And a couple of years later, in the late 1970s, he emerged with this masterpiece, which is one of my favourite of his albums. It's probably his third greatest album after Rosemary Lane and his debut. This is called Avocet, which is a wholly instrumental album. It's a trio of himself, Martin Jenkins, and I know there's another bloke involved in this one as well. Oh, Danny Thompson, of course. And yeah, it's really, really lovely album. The 18-minute title track is really nice. It's quite progressive folk in sound. There's a bit of flute in it, but a lot of classical guitar, and ample time for Danny Thompson to portray his chops. There's a few jazzy solos in it, but well worth checking out. This is also on Charisma. So from 1979, Avocet. Then he released a couple of albums for a variety of labels, which are relatively minor, until this release, which came out about 8 years ago. I've shown this one recently. This is The Black Swan, and he's helped out in this one by Beth Orton and Devendra Banhart as well. The Old Triangle, the Brenda Behan track, features in this one. Really nice album. I'm very fond of this one. It's called The Black Swan. And of course, there are loads of transatlantic comps. There's maybe 3 or 4 versions of it, and samplers. This is the first one, which is basically a combination of all his tracks from his first 5 albums. It's called the Bert Jansch sampler, funnily enough. But this one is definitely worth checking out, because there's possibly 2 or 3 unreleased tracks in this one, including the lovely track In This Game. And this is called Box of Love. I've heard it called Sampler Volume 2 as well by Bert Jansch. So that's all I have of Mr. Jansch. I've got practically all of his works on digital download, mostly illegal, but that's it. So moving on. John Renbourn was the former flatmate of Bert Jansch. They lived together in London for a period of time, and this is his 1965 debut, self-titled. He had an altogether more bluesy style than Bert Jansch initially, and as his career developed, he got more into kind of early medieval music, and that's best exemplified by this, which is his third album, which is called Sir John a Lot of Merry England and The Green Knight. Bit of a mouthful, that one. All of these issues are on the Transatlantic label. This is a particularly interesting release. It features Terry Cox, who was a member of Pentangle with him. In 1970, he released this album, which is one of his crowning achievements, called The Lady and the Unicorn. And this is a collection of classical guitar and early Italian and medieval acoustic balladry. It's a magnificent piece. And the front cover, there is a tapestry that graces one of the museums in Paris, featuring the titular line and the unicorn. It's a beautiful album, beautiful acoustic album. And there's the Hirsute John himself there. This also features Terry Cox in that one. And Terry Cox also plays in this particular one, as indeed does Danny Thompson, which is a 1971 release, I think, called Pharaoh Annie. And this has got some beautiful tracks on it, including Willie O' the Wainsbury, I believe. I think that's on this album. And a couple of years later, in 1976, he released this one here called The Hermit, which is an astonishing album, really. It features a lot of Irish tracks, traditional Irish tracks that were composed by the blind harpist Turlough O'Carolan. And yeah, there's a number of tracks. Owen Rua O'Neill is on it, and yeah, it's mostly Irish and Celtic acoustic balladry, but there are some classical guitar moments in it as well. But a lovely album called The Hermit. And as usual, transatlantic, there are a number of samplers, as they call them, and this one is basically a compilation. It's by no means a sampler. There are no non-album tracks on this particular release.
I'm within your eyes. I'm with my cat tonight, while your heart does lie. I've tried.
This is the second album by the supergroup The Pentangle. It's called Sweet Child. It's on the Reprise label, and this is my favourite of their whatever they did, 8 or 9 albums. But this is their second album. It features some mugshots of the crew, including a very jazzy Danny Thompson. But it also features a very interesting mugshot there of Bert Jansch with his dog, which reminds me of the cover of his 1969 release, Birthday Blues, which as of yet has eluded me. But an extremely nice album, well worth checking out. As is this one, which is their debut on Pentangle, which came out in the same year. Bunch of Thyme is on this one, and also Bells, I believe, which is a really good track as well. And their third album is perhaps their most famous. This is a gatefold sleeve given to me VCLT style by Dave Dart Dove last year. He knew that I was looking for this one. It features their most celebrated track, Light Flight, but a really nice album as well. Just pipped, I think, by Sweet Child. Their sixth album is Solomon's Seal. There's a stunning version of Willie O' the Winsbury on this. But other than that, it's relatively patchy, to be honest. And the best moments of their first 6 albums are collected on this worthwhile compilation called The Pentangle. It's released by transatlantic labels. They were big fans of rehashing work.
The hazel bush o'erhangs the thrush, the spreading thorn, the linden